Welcome to Brookside Chats, everybody. My name is Brooklyn. Today I'm joined with our co-host, Taco, and today we got a special guest. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, everybody, my name is Hal Oberlender, and I'm here.
So, what's your background, Hal?
So, I am a recent graduate from Creighton University School of Law. I graduated in May. I spent some time in Idaho at Concordia University School of Law. So I spent 2 years up there and a year here, and I graduated with my JD in May.
Nice.
Congrats.
So,
Thanks.
we brought you today because we're looking at different solutions with ending homelessness. In particular, we're looking at this case that I think was actually near Concordia University or in the city of Boise, right?
So I believe that the case that you're talking about would be Martin versus Boise. It was a case that was settled by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in 2019. And it was I was in Boise, started in Boise in 2018. So right about the time that I was up there, it was getting headway, and there was a lot of publicity both on the news and in the law field. The university up there had a lot of lawyers in and out, and we had a couple of clinics that I worked in that we worked real specifically with the homeless population and the homeless community, and so it was a big deal in and out of the school.
So what made this case really controversial, or what was made it kind of a big deal?
So the big thing about this case is far before this had all happened, in 2002 and in 2005, the city of Boise passed two city ordinances. One was a city code and the other was a city ordinance, I guess. But they basically ended up being targeted at the homeless population. The first one that they enacted was a camping ordinance that stated that if any individual were to sleep on a street, sidewalk, park, or public place, they would be subject to civil fine and jail. And then they defined camping as using a public property for temporary or permanent place of dwelling, lodging, or residency. And then the second was what they called a disorderly conduct ordinance, and it stated that being in any building by occupying, lodging, or sleeping, whether it be public or private, was against this city ordinance without consent of the owner. And basically at first that was really a general overview, but as the law went along and crept closer to this coming into existence, this court case, it started targeting more homeless population than anyone else.
Yeah, I would assume it would kind of do, and I mean, as you kind of mentioned, the way it was stated, either jail or fines. I wondered who could really pay if you're homeless and struggling with finances already, how would you be able to afford that, if anything?
In the court case itself, when it started in the district court, and the reason why it took so long is the actual claim by the named parties, Martin. There was 6 individuals in total, but Martin was the named party for all 6 of the individuals.
Okay.
They actually challenged several times that it seemed like it targeted them financially because there was no way that they could afford a fine if they were receiving a fine. And so it was unreasonable because they were being deemed to go to jail because they would either receive a fine or receive jail time, but not having any money to pay the fine, they were just receiving jail time further down the line. So it just stretched out the amount of time that they would have to serve for such a meaningless issue, a meaningless thing. They couldn't pay the fine to begin with.
And they didn't provide any pointed at any housing, or were they trying to point at least some people to the right direction so they can provide some housing so they weren't just just intentionally getting fines?
So the biggest issue that came about this case getting up to the circuit court, and what really ended up with this case being ruled in favor of Martin and the 6 other claimed parties was one of the issues in Boise is most of the homeless shelters and housing and that was privately ran by different churches or different faith-based groups. So there was to my knowledge, I remember there was a Catholic, there was a Protestant, there was a Lutheran, and there was an Islamic religion-based homeless shelter in the city of Boise. And one of the requirements that each of those organizations had to allow individuals bedding or meal tickets was the individual had to go to so many hours of religious-based activities. So mass, or they had to conform to the ideas of a prayer schedule, or AA. Some of them even required AA or NA, things like that. And so one of the claims that the individuals made is, I don't believe in that religious faith, so why should I have to conform to receive a bed or to receive a meal ticket or anything like that? And their other option then at that case was to sleep on the street and go to jail, essentially. So they were a rock and a hard place between conforming to a religion that they didn't believe in and going to jail for sleeping on a public bench overnight.
It kind of sounds like a terminology I've heard about is like, I believe, hostile architecture, where basically it's architecture just designed to kind of like isolate certain communities or kind of like prevent them. So like I've known there was like homelessness, like overpasses, and what they'll put is like, you know, concrete spikes, or there would be like a bench and they'll make it like really uncomfortable intentionally to like not like fall in, to not let them like sleep. Would that kind of go towards that like hostile like architecture in a way, or is it kind of like more systematic?
I think it is in a way, but it was more architecture in the way that we look at architecture in the law as building of laws.
Okay.
So it was all, they didn't necessarily go out as a city and build a park bench that got hot after 5 hours, if that's possible, or fell apart if you sat in it too long. Mm-hmm. But what they did do is, through these laws, they geared them, and each time they sent a challenge up to the district court, and then that challenge got appealed up to the Ninth Circuit. The Ninth Circuit multiple times kicked this back down with issues that the circuit court needed to look into. And each time the ordinance were changed. So originally, the ordinance stated, the first ordinance dealing with sleeping or sitting down dealt with any time at all. And the city felt like that was too much of a reach after it got kicked up to the Ninth Circuit the first time. So they changed the ordinance to say, okay, we're only going to enforce this after a certain period of time. So after midnight, you can't be sleeping on the benches. Because at first it was anyone who slept on a park bench at any time could be subject to this. So if you were a student at the university and you left school and, hey, I have 2 hours until my next class, I'm going to go lay down on this park bench, or I'm going to go with my girlfriend or wife and have a picnic at the park, and I fall asleep at my picnic. Oh, well, now I'm subject to a fine because I'm sleeping in the park. So the city reeled that back a little bit and changed it to where it was only overnight, or only in certain areas of the park that they knew were geared more towards individuals who didn't have a home as opposed to a student.
Just imagining like somebody getting arrested for, like, oh, what's your crime? I slept at like a park bench. You know,
well, beyond
like
that, like, you've been to the library plenty of times. I know I've been with you
yeah.
there, and on the third floor, people would always be sleeping out there, and I imagine them getting arrested or fined. But I'm curious.
to like all students are like going through finals week, just crashing and just like
Mr. Finals because you're in jail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Freaking criminals.
That's a good excuse. It's not that you're final, though. I mean, Right?
Hey, Professor.
Sorry, Professor, I couldn't make it. I was in
The
jail
one
for
phone call you get, you call your professor.
Hey, I'm going to be a little late to this test. Can you, like, prolong it by, like, I don't know.
A week or a month?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's clearly it's targeted. But I'm curious if you could speak on this. What led to these ordinances in Boise? Was homelessness such an issue over there? Like other cities, San Francisco, Seattle, Venice Beach, they're really dealing with a lot of homeless population issues, and they're trying different ways to address it. And some have come out to be very controversial. Like, what kind of, if you could walk us through what led to this, these sets of ordinances in Boise?
So to my knowledge, when I looked back on it and I did some research on it to kind of figure it out, because I wasn't originally from there, so it was a new experience to me. Boise is one of those places that it's just kind of up there. It's a lot like Omaha is, or Lincoln, per se, where you drive all the way across Nebraska and you finally find one city in the middle of the state that really is what you would consider a city and not a little town. So Boise was kind of that way, and they went through consistent changes right around the 2005, 2006 timeframe, where they started to want to revitalize the downtown area and bring some life to the downtown, where it had a major university, but there really wasn't any nightlife or anything like that, or an art district or anything like that. So they went through this revitalization period where they wanted to bring up the downtown and make it a nice place to go on Friday nights and just walk around, and farmers markets and things like that. And I know when I was up there, there was never a weekend that there wasn't something going on in the downtown area, where they wouldn't shut down major blocks of downtown. But the issue that they had at the time was there was an increase in the homeless population in that area because of economic recession and the housing crisis that was felt right around the 2008 period. They kind of got a little bit of a jump beforehand on that, but major economic crises like that was the big thing that, we've got an influx of homeless population that we've never had anymore, and we want to revitalize to make revenue. So it was, somebody has to suffer for this, and it's not going to be us if we're making money.
Right. And that's the solution to a lot of cities that I've seen that are trying to do that, is they want to hide their problems. They don't want to face the reality. And a lot of cities don't like to show that that's an issue. They don't want to deal with it, so it's easy to just hide them.
And one of the big things in the clinic that I worked in, I was in a landlord-tenant housing clinic, and we worked for low-income tenants, trying to keep evictions off people's records and keep them in their apartments and keep them from being homeless. But one of the organizations that we worked with, they were in charge of getting government money, getting federal stipends to pay for people's houses that lost their job. We worked with them a lot during COVID. But one of the things that they received lots of money from the city from was to buy bus tickets. And that was one of the solutions that they originally came up with. Was, we have a homeless problem right now. Instead of targeting the individuals, the best solution that we can say is, we've got a Greyhound bus stop right here in Boise. Where is home for you that isn't right here where we have to see you? Can we buy you a $150 bus ticket to go to Salt Lake or Las Vegas? We can do that. We'll buy you snacks. We'll buy you luggage. And as long as you're not here, we don't have to worry about you. And that was the biggest solution right off before they started passing these ordinances was, hey, if we can punt these individuals away from the city, then we don't have a problem. And I think that's a big solution that a lot of cities have come up with. And it doesn't fix the problem, it pushes the problem.
I think that's kind of why you see, like, LA has that, like, huge...
LA, a lot of people
population.
got bused to Seattle also. Mm-hmm. It's bad over there. There's a lot of... It's very... I don't know, it's hard to address this issue. Homelessness it's not something that... Unfortunately, it's not going to disappear.
Yeah.
Especially, it's been probably made worse by COVID. And throwing it off, making it other people's problems, is not going to make it better, because it's just going to make clusters of homelessness that's just going to...
I wonder if, like, so I guess maybe one thing that could happen that could make maybe this idea of like greyhounding like homeless population to like another city. I know states commonly sue one another. I wonder if like if I don't know, say Cali gets like gutsy and just like sues like another like state, just being like, hey, stop sending us your homeless, or like, you know, that, or what will be like the legal parameters or whatever. So
I mean, that's a drastic decision, and the biggest issue that always happens anytime, and I mean this case is seminal to that, is the issue that these individuals faced in 2005, 2006. They filed their first suit against the city of Boise in 2011, and it got resolved by the Ninth Circuit in 2019, and the city filed for cert for it to be brought up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court denied it. So it's one of those things that you're talking about a 10 to 15 year solution going through the legal field, and the biggest issue with that is like you said, if California sued Idaho to stop Idaho from sending them more homeless, that's a way maybe to address it, but you're talking about a 10 to 15 year court battle where nobody really wins, because the individuals who are suffering don't receive any help in 10 years. And for that population who faces homelessness, 10 years is a long time to not have a house.
yeah.
It could be life or death. So it's really not a easy issue to find a good solution to.
If anything, I think there needs to be, you need to have like a multi-step like solution if you want to tackle homelessness, because like there's a lot of like parameters with homelessness. I think it's not just the whole like, hey, getting them houses, it's also like the mental health, it's the economics of like, do people actually sadly want to hire these? I don't think a lot of people want to hire like homeless people, or like let alone a livable wage to like pay rent with, sadly, because they're going to discriminate them because, oh, they don't shower, or hey, this person has a history of drugs, or hey, this person isn't mentally like checked. Like they always want to try and find like some better candidate, and they'll find any. It's always going to be an uphill battle to just give them a job, and let alone be able to like afford enough money to get like a house, then like how many other living expenses and stuff like that. So I think maybe a solution possibly, I know we were talking about this on the side, is like, say if like there's like a government contract with some of these homelessness people that they're like, you know, cleaning up the city while they provide them with like a housing, and they can make like, you know, at least minimum wage or some amount of money, but also be provided with food and stuff like that. That way you keep your cities clean, but simultaneously you also are like helping out your homelessness and like helping them out like with these like, you know, different like amounts of work around here.
I would go, well, first of all, that's socialism. It's not gonna happen.
I know.
Second of all, I would go beyond just cleaning cities. Like there's able-bodied workforce, construction, infrastructure jobs. There's a lot of jobs out there that even today need filling. The matter is that not a lot of these individuals can sustain a job for that long. It's easy to get discouraged also when you're living in Denver, which also has a large homeless population issue, and you're working minimum wage. Minimum wage isn't going to get you anywhere in America, really. I can't think of a place where minimum wage will get you an apartment. So it's way beyond that. It's really systematic. It's socioeconomic. It's, I don't want to say cultural, but to a point kind of cultural also. There's so many layers to this. I mean, it's really complicated. More than just, you know, let's give them a broom and, you know, have them clean up the city.
Or just get a job. Like it's not just that simple. And it's not like if you just say like tell that to like a homeless person, they just whoosh. They can like, you know, financially easily recover from that, and it's pretty easy to fall to that like same like homeless status.
Well, it's pervasive. A lot of people that try to get out of it just fall back into it. It's really hard, and it's generational also. It's, you know, if you are a child and whose parents are homeless and you're living in shelter, it's really hard to get anywhere beyond that, because you don't have access to the same resources, opportunities in education. It's just really difficult. There's a really good but sad documentary about children in poverty in Iowa, and they followed, I think it was like 3 or 4 families in Iowa around Davenport area. I think it was Davenport, the Quad Cities around that area.
Yeah.
And some of them were homeless, some of them were about to get evicted, some of them lost their homes, some of them were about to give birth to a new child and they already had like 2 kids and they lost their jobs. The thing is, and this was I think during the Great Recession or the 2008,
Housing crisis.
The housing crisis time, and they did a follow up. I found this really interesting. They did a follow up, I think 10 years later, on that same family or those sets of families. And I mean, I went in there hoping that things would have changed for them and that it would have gotten better, but they're in the same spot 10 years later, still homeless or losing their home, losing their kids, losing battle with addiction. I cannot remember the name of it. It's on YouTube. It's free to watch. But it's just sad seeing how and it's generational because some of them the kids are now older. They're trying to go to school, but they can't go to school, so so they got in trouble and whatnot. It's just,
I know on that, when thinking back to these homeless shelters in Boise, that I remember one of the things that was so shocking to us in the housing clinic, and when I talked to the attorney, one of the things that they fought the most for was a lot of these homeless shelters in Boise were gender specific. So they were male homeless shelters and female homeless shelters. And if you got into a family homeless shelter, female could bring their children, but if she had male children, so like sons, they could only be with their mother until they were the age of 14, and then they were removed to the male homeless shelter. So that was one of the things that was so shocking. It was a lot of single mothers with children who were 10, if they had a 10-year-old boy or a 13-year-old boy, would not go to these homeless shelters because you're losing your child at 14. The homeless shelter is taking them away, and there's nothing that they can do about it because they can't stay there any longer. And then again, they can't sleep on the street with those laws the way that they were. So it was they were being doubly punished. It was, what do? I can't live here. I can't live out there. If I live here, I lose my child. And so there was no solution to it. And that was one of the big things. It was. I know that family homelessness is a big issue because there's so many factors. And one of the things in the housing clinic that we focus on is, one eviction could lead you to homelessness. All of us who rent are one eviction away from being homeless because the big deal that we had to fight for was making sure that no one got an eviction on the record, because our clinic statistics were the people who we had, if they got an eviction on their record, they were 95% more likely to become homeless from that, because you can't find a place to rent once you get one eviction. And
it follows you with credit scores.
Yeah.
And
that is crazy.
It's 7 years before an eviction falls off your record, and when it falls off your record, it falls off the record. But if there's any court document that was filed or anything like that, if the housing company goes and looks that up, it'll still show that you were sued by some sort of creditor. So if it was like property management company, they're still going to draw a red flag even though it's fallen off your record, and that essentially is useless, especially in an area like that where in Boise if you were out of an apartment, it was turned around in 2 days. There wasn't a 30-day wait period. There was waiting lists for most apartments that were 5 to 7 months long because people wanted to move there quickly. And so it was just, it's a terrible situation that, you don't ever think about it because you go to bed and you think everything's fine, but really in the grand scheme of things, all of us are one eviction away from being homeless. And it is a bigger problem than what it really seems like.
And I think sorry to kind of pedal back a little, but the thing that it's kind of hard to hear too is just when you were talking about how 14 and 13 they'll separate the kid from the actual mother. It's just aren't they like illegally an adult by like 18 or 19? Like not even like illegal. It's just, that's just, wow. Like I can't like interpret that actually. Like it's just kind of crazy.
It's very draconian.
Yeah.
It is.
Like almost like, I don't want to be this dramatic, but like Geneva Convention kind of like family separation or intentional family separation in a way.
Well, I mean, it's not much different than even like the outcry on the border where kids are getting separated from their families. It's you know, that drew a lot of outrage. It's you don't separate families.
Yeah.
That's the main thing. It comes down to you don't separate families. Unless the child is in genuine danger, their parents are abusing them. You have at it.
Yeah.
But take care of the children also. But if the parents are trying, if it's a single mom, she's trying, she's looking for shelter, don't separate the family.
Agreed. So, I've seen like a shelter-in-place law for like New York because whenever like, you know, winter comes around, you know, gets really cold up in the Northeast, and if I'm correct, Boise gets pretty cold, I would say, certainly.
Relatively.
So there was just no shelter in place because otherwise, if like homelessness are just sleeping out on the streets and, you know, you get a winter front, that could, you know, lead to hypothermia and die. So what was like, but yet like if you had that jail and like fining, what was their solution for that though?
So one of the things, and it kind of gets into this, when it got kicked down one of the times from the circuit court, the city changed the ordinance up. They made the first change to where they made it only overnights. And then another change that they made was going back to, well, we won't issue any citations, we won't issue any jail time if there are beds, only if there are not beds available in the homeless shelters. So it went back to the issue of there are beds available in these homeless shelters, and the claims that the individuals were making were, we can't go to those homeless shelters because they don't conform with our beliefs. And the city's argument was, we don't own those homeless shelters. We're not doing anything to invalidate your freedom of religion or your freedom to not be part of a religion. And so it was really the way that the laws work, where one group gets blamed for something, and so instead of taking responsibility for it, they blame somebody else so that they don't have responsibility anymore. And so there was no real solution because everybody was sitting in a circle blaming somebody else. But that was the solution that the city had for like a stay-in-place order or a shelter-in-place when it gets cold. It was, we have available beds in this facility and this facility and this facility. You're choosing not to go there. So we can't do anything if you choose not to.
Gotcha.
All right, so in your work with legal clinics and homelessness population, what are some of the reasons, trends perhaps, that you see as to why individuals become homeless in the first place and why they stay homeless, and if that makes sense?
Yeah, it does. And one of the biggest things, I kind of hinted about it earlier, is evictions and the issues that I dealt with in the housing clinic. It's one of those things that, like I said, one eviction can lead to homelessness, and there are multiple individuals that we had in the housing clinic who were able to find another place after they got an eviction only because they went to Craigslist and were able to rent one bedroom out of a 5-bedroom house, and they were paying $700, $800, $900 a month for one bedroom. I mean, just astronomical prices that wouldn't make sense, and then being able to live there only a couple of months, especially during COVID when everybody was losing their jobs or were working from home, and when you're living in a house that there's 9, 10, 11 people because there's 5 bedrooms and that sort of thing, you can't really work from home. So they were losing their job. So homelessness is basically the one that I know the most, is because of evictions. Another thing that kind of sort of falls in that is Section 8 housing and individuals who are allowed federal government stimulus money for Section 8 housing, which is the individuals who are extremely low income. Those are individuals who are so far below the poverty line that they're in the very bottom bracket, which homeless individuals make up 25% of that. But I know when we were in Boise, there was a 9-month waiting period for Section 8 housing. And every apartment complex had a certain amount that they would allow to be Section 8 housing, but the requirements that the federal government place on that are so extreme that individuals can't do it. It can only be like apartment complexes. Because one of the main things that I remember is you had to have at least 150 units to be eligible to receive Section 8 credits. And then of those 150 units, 1% were Section 8. So if you do that monster math real quick, you're looking at less than 20 apartments in total that are allowed to be for individuals who make less than $930 a year. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I think the numbers are, for a family of 8, it's $15,000 made you extremely low income. So a family of 8, that's not very much money per person at $15,000. And that's what would get you into one of those 15 or 20 apartments. And there were probably 30 different apartment complexes in Boise and in the metro surrounding area. So you're talking maybe, if you were lucky, 300 to 400 of these houses that could be susceptible to people who had very, very low social economical standings. And so when they were full, and people didn't move because they couldn't find jobs to allow them to rent better places, and they were allowed to renew each year. So when somebody got it, it was wonderful when we were able to get someone in a Section 8 home, but at the same time we knew that they were pretty much stuck there for life. And so you help one person but have to push away 5, and that's a gut punch. No other way to say that. That's just a gut punch.
Oh, and beyond that, it's like you said, they're stuck there for life, because what's the incentive to make more money if you're gonna, because that's extreme low numbers of income that you have to make. So if you make it slightly more than that, you get kicked out, I'm guessing. Mm-hmm. But you still can't afford an apartment. So you're it's a very fine line of staying in those houses making very little income, or making slightly more, getting kicked out, but not being able to still afford an apartment at those rates that are, available at the city.
And that was the deal, that whenever we would talk to those individuals or survey those individuals to see what their mindset was, that was the thing that was so shocking. It was, they would know how much money they would make per check if they worked such and such hours, because if the number was $15,000, and it fluctuates year to year, but if it was $15,000 for a family of 8, and they made $15,000 and a penny, just like that, it was gone. They were out. They would lose the house. They made too much. They incomed out, and so they would have to have their $15,000 to afford an apartment for a year, and utilities, and cars, and clothes for work, and every other expense that you have to have as a normal individual. So it was one of those things that they knew how much money they could make and not make in a year, and they would never flirt with that line, because the drastic ramifications of being wrong one time were homelessness. And that's terrible, but it's how it was. It was, if I do any better this month, I do worse in the long run.
Mm-hmm. That's messed up. I can't even, that's psychological games that people have to live with.
You lose, you just...
It's a lose-lose.
Yeah.
And the thing that made it so tough was that was subject to a family of 8. And the thing that bothered me so much is if it was like a husband and wife and 5 kids. Well, all 5 of the kids were being taught that this is what we have to do so that we don't live on the street. Mm-hmm. Or going back to what we said earlier, this is what we have to do so that I can make sure that your mom can live in a shelter with all of you if we get kicked out of here, because maybe one of you's 13. Maybe you have a 15-year-old child. And so it's one of those things, it's like, you've created a society where it's okay to teach individuals to not advance themselves, because being able to push yourself and work harder or get a job or do any of the things that normal people say to homeless individuals will cause you to not be able to live in a house and things like that. And so it was really this whole, if you deep dive into, well, America, the American dream, but don't follow the American dream because you'll lose your house. So it was this give and take of, oh, this doesn't feel good.
Good old American nightmare, it sounds like. But yeah, it's just, I just wonder, like, so if you can't advance with like any like, you know, income, are they like, would they also take away food stamps? Would they also take away like any of those like other like amenities to kind of help out with like lower income like housing? Or is it just like they'll just take away the Section 8 part? Or
so it was mostly just the Section 8. Food stamps and everything were state. Mostly, they would get their food stamps from the state, not from the federal government, because it was just, food stamps is a whole nother topic.
Gotcha.
That we could spend hours and hours and hours talking on through the federal. But they would get a lot of those stipends from the state and things of that nature. But really, that was their biggest concern, because people would scrounge and be okay with less food, but their biggest concern was, what do I do if I don't have a roof over my head? Especially in a place that's, what do I do if I don't have a roof over my head, and if I sleep outside, I'm going to get a ticket and go to jail. So it was, I cannot eat today. I cannot have my lights on today. I can't not have a roof over my head.
so just kind of like shell shocks me a little bit. Just like, damn, like I know like somebody told me the other day, maybe just people just want to be homelessness, but it's like, no, it's not that they just want to be and not try. It's just society just going after them. And it's just like, how can you encourage people to, like, you know, live the American dream if, like, at the same time, if you take one step out of line, there you go. And not only that, you also have the pressure and added stress of like your wife, your kids, and you know, you obviously want them to succeed in life, but like if you lose like these benefits, like you're gonna have to have the struggle of like going through that exact same process of being like homeless. And it's just crazy to me to hear that.
One of the things that when I think about this, that stories, and there's tons of them, and they'll come up in my head and I'll think about it all night. We could do this again just on stories tomorrow. But one of the things that I can think about, my supervising attorney when I was in the clinic in Idaho worked in an organization called Intermountain Fair Housing, and they were that area's Section 8 housing specific. They were the ones who would handle any legal claims, not just for Section 8, but for any housing claims for discrimination or anything like that. But they dealt with Section 8 a lot, and they also had a branch of their work that just focused on financial counseling. And she would tell us stories all the time about individuals who would come into the office and ask for financial counseling, but not financial counseling to, hey, I have $600 that I make at work. I have this bill to pay. Can you help me with that? But financial counseling to, hey, I have this much money that I make. Can my wife go get a part-time job so we have extra money to buy Christmas presents, or will that put us over the limit and get us kicked out of our house? Mm-hmm. So it was the stories, the just absolutely horror stories that you hear of people. My kids turning 16, we'd like to buy them a car. Can I go out and get another job to make enough money this month to get that car? Or is that going to kick us out of our house? And I mean, for us as individuals, we don't think about that. I mean, you might struggle, but you don't think about, am I going to lose my house if I make an extra $5? I mean, all of us at work can, if your boss comes up to you at work and says, hey, do you want to stay and get some overtime? You're thinking, yeah, I could do that. I mean, there's hundreds of things that you could ask me right now that I could buy with an extra $50 for staying at work. Mm-hmm. But for individuals like that, if their boss asked them, they weren't faced with, hey, I can stay. We had individuals who would come up to us and tell us, hey, I lost my job because I walked out because my boss asked me to work an 8-hour shift and I can only work 6 more hours this week. And so it was, my God, you left a job because you were working too many hours as opposed to not enough, and it was just so shocking. And so it's horrifying. It's just horrifying.
Yeah, it's and you know it's you know that situation where you have to choose between housing or even providing basic necessities for your family. But it's also the understanding on society. You know, when your boss tells you that and you have to explain it to them, like people, like you said, like your coworker said that some people just choose to be, or who was it?
I don't recall, but it was just something that...
And the individual said that they choose, you know, people choose to be homeless if they... there's a misconception on that, obviously. Not, you know, there's some people that genuinely do choose to be homeless for one reason or another. They choose to be out on the street. They like their freedom or what it may be. But the majority of people would rather have a house, right? So, but, you know, in the media, the way it's portrayed, the way that we're taught is that people that are homeless are lazy, they're drug addicts, or this or that. So that desensitizes us to the real issue of what, you know, being homeless is.
If you can dehumanize them, you can probably like do like the the hostile architecture. It makes it completely acceptable, or you know,
worse than that.
It's fine,
I mean,
like throwing them like to like another city, like as if they're like just scraps, not even thinking like, hey, these are citizens of our city.
Oh, when you don't think of them as humans, you don't think of them as anything more than what, like... Exactly. I mean, we've seen it throughout history with people. You know, on the more extreme side of things, Nazis dehumanized a population, and they...
And they killed homeless.
Yeah.
Just...
Oh, yeah.
Easily.
Yeah, there's categories of people that they dehumanized, and, you know... And that's what allows them to carry out these atrocities. So if we do the same thing on, again, this scale of homelessness, then people have no issue turning the other way just so that they can have a nice downtown where they can have farmers markets and lights up on the weekends and all that stuff.
It's easy to pretend a problem isn't there if you just, like, you know, put it to like a big section. I know.
Well, I mean, when you think about it in the grand scheme, and it's terrible to think of it this way, but if you dehumanize someone to that point, and you look at the other side of it, when a stray animal is found by animal control, they're taken to an institution and institutionalized in hopes that someone comes and adopts them. But we can't do that with homeless people. But if you dehumanize them, it's, well, we can just take them and institutionalize them in jail or write them tickets that they know that they can't afford, and then we can just institutionalize them in the penal system, and they will spend countless trips or repeat offend over and over and over on a city ordinance until they become a habitual offender, or until they decide that it's not worth it. I mean, one of the things, another story that I remember, and it's terrible, the attorney that I worked with, that I brought to our diversity and inclusion that worked on this case, one of the individuals, he remembers telling him when he was in his office, he said, I break into cars. And he says, well, why do you break into cars? And he goes, it's November. I have nowhere to go. If I break into a car, I usually break into the car and then call the police. And he says, well, why do you do that? And he says, well, I know that if I do that, I'll end up in jail for 30 days or 60 days because I can't afford bond. And they'll sentence me because I've done it before, so they'll give me 60 days or something like that, and I'll spend the whole winter in jail getting 3 meals a day. So you're allowing somebody to go, okay, I can do what I need to do to be an upstanding citizen, or I can commit petty crimes and be given 3 meals a day, a warm blanket, and a pillow, and have no worries at all. And it's just,
It reminds me, I've heard another case like this, and I kind of want to like put a disclaimer just in case it's just a meme that just somebody made out of their ass. But there was a guy supposedly that like would rob a bank only for $1 just to kind of, again, get all the benefits of like free meals a day and the shelter because he was homeless. And it's just like, it's kind of like it's kind of crazy just to think about. Like, holy shit, like this land of the free, but basic necessities are like a privilege.
You're better off in jail than homeless sometimes.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a story that I've heard similar tales around us about that. But you also got to remember the criminal justice system does not help at all, because there's situations as well where, like, I think it was
reconvicting
Dallas
and stuff
or
like that.
Houston would go out and see, punish people of poverty or low income, throw them in jail. They would lose their job because they couldn't afford bond to get out, so they're stuck there for 2-3 weeks. And you keep this cycle of picking people up over the dumbest things sometimes, throwing them in jail knowing that they can't get out. They'll stay there, jail gets funding. Private prisons as a whole other thing.
Oh boy, we're going way too many tangents.
But the thing is, the criminal justice cycle is also very flawed, in that manner. It's
Well, it's the way that history works, and it's so funny that when everybody has a preconceived notion of law, and in law school you study all about cases that make no sense. One of the cases in property, the very first case that you learn in property is an old English case from England, Pearson v. Post, and it's just, that doesn't make any sense anymore because that's so old history for now, the current time that we're in. I mean, that was pre-revolutionary time. But in that era, they had debtors' prisons. For if you couldn't afford to pay your debt, you went to prison and spent a certain amount of time in prison until your debt was paid, or you've paid your debt to society by being in jail for a certain period of time. And in America, we said, no, we don't want to do that anymore. Debtors' prisons don't make any sense. But we just put a different name on it at this point, because it's not a debtor's prison anymore. It's just regular prison with people who have debt that commit petty crimes just to go back to debtor's prison. So essentially it's a grand circle of, we were here, we're going to do better by being right back here, and we've done nothing but rotate.
And going back to the point of like, oh yeah, if they can just get a job, most people don't want to hire like anyone with like a prison record too. So like it's like, well, A, they're living on the street, and then B, any criminal background, you just throw out like the application just immediately. And
it reminds me of Shawshank Redemption, even though that's not the plot of it, but it reminds me to that part where the old man gets out of, I think it's the right movie? Yeah, he gets out of jail after being there this whole time. It's the only thing he's known. Finally gets out, and he has trouble reintegrating to society because he's been in jail for like his whole life. And it's really sad he takes his life, but it's that, prisons have, there's a lot of systems, a lot of ideas and programs on how to reintegrate people that have been in prison back into society. Some prisons have education programs, workshops. I think some in Europe do it better than a lot of them here. I think Germany has one where they have work experience so that once they get out, they can actually go back into the workforce. Where here, that's not the case. You go back out there, you're not integrated into society, you can't get a job, so you go back.
Well, the thing that, I guess, oh boy, we're going down the prison pathway, but it's just, there's not really a part to kind of like reform any of these prisoners. It's just, hey, go into a hole, think about what you did, and then just head out. It's not like helping like prisoners educate themselves or trying to like get better. So
what incentive does a prison have to do that?
Yeah.
Because some prisons will get very, very cheap labor out of prisoners also.
Mm-hmm.
So what incentives do they have to do that?
True. So, man, this is a lovely, depressing episode, isn't it?
So I guess on a brighter note, is there a bright side to any of this? Like, are cities taking incentives to address these issues? Are communities rising up to help? Like, what's the state of this? If you can speak on that.
And I guess like another thing, maybe like for starting this question, what was the actual final conclusion of this Boise case?
Oh yeah.
So in the end, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled, after several times of it being kicked down and back up and down and back up, that the two ordinance of the city had violated the Eighth Amendment of the 6 individuals, and any individual that had received citations or jail time because of it. So there was a violation. So both of the ordinances were thrown out. And then it was kicked back down for a final ruling, and before it was finally ruled on by the district court, again, the city had realized that because they had tried to reach out for cert from the Supreme Court, there was no other avenue and they were going to lose. They ultimately they reached an agreement with the other side. And I know that there were some things that they've changed the ordinances to where they functionally don't exist anymore. They're still there on paper, but they have gone through and created training for the police department. So now the police are required to do certain things before they issue citations. They are to educate on these facilities. The city has set aside a certain amount of money, and at one point in 2019, I believe it was $1.1 million for creation of a homeless shelter in the city that is a non-denominational, for lack of better terms, that has absolutely no connection with any faith-based or religion-based avenue. So it's just purely a homeless shelter. Mm-hmm. And they've received federal and state and private donations to make that homeless shelter bigger. I just saw on the news the other day that they're going to build another wing onto that. So they're going to create a city homeless shelter, which doesn't fix the solution, but it doesn't preclude anyone, and it fixes their slight issue to it. Mm-hmm. If there's a bright side to it, it's that this case has opened the eyes to the fact that individuals in the homeless community have some avenue in the court system to get just these discriminatory actions settled. I mean, it's not a quick solution. It's not a happy ending that it took 9, 10, 11 years to get people a result, and it didn't keep people from jail. They ended up in jail. They ended up having to pay fines, or not pay fines because they couldn't afford it, but there is an avenue for them in the court system to eventually be given some help. And now that there's a court case that showed that the courts slapped down a city for the homeless population, more homeless populations can use that, and more courts can use that as persuasive authority if a case ever comes up in their courts. So,
do you think this could also kind of like go and fight the case with like the section that lower income housing, where they're having like to, if they go a little bit above that line, like they could like be like thrown down? Or do you think that would be a harder case to, you know?
I think that'd be such a hard case, because winning a court case against a city is difficult, but it happens. I mean, we're talking about 6 homeless individuals winning a court case against the city of Boise. Winning a court case against the state is extremely hard. Mm-hmm. Beating the federal government in court is it's a Cinderella story. I mean, it would show up on ESPN. It was one of those things that would be a top 10, because it's not something that hardly ever happens. And especially Section 8 housing is something that is not wet ink. I mean, it is wrote into the law the way that it is dried black ink, and it has been there for years and years and years and years, and it's established, and it continues to it's at the point now that whenever Congress has to reenact it, they don't even talk about it. They just blindly reenact it because it's worked, it's accomplished what they want to accomplish, which is a face value, we're doing something image that it would be hard to challenge it at a minute level. 6 people would be rather minute, and it would never see the light of day. I mean, it would have to be a large scale challenge, and then it would have to be an issue that there was actually public outcry for. And I mean, we've kicked it around for the amount of time that we've talked that this is a hotbed issue between two differing opinions of people. And without a majority opinion, it would be hard for something like that to really get challenged in a federal court system.
But you're saying there's a chance.
There's a chance, but
There's always a chance.
Yeah, but it's always going to be an uphill battle. I figured so.
and even if you got several states to back something like that, I mean, it's really, there's 50 states in the U.S. and it's really hard to say, oh, well, Rhode Island is in support of something like this, so we've got to pass it. Well, okay,
Yeah.
there's 49 that aren't, so sorry about you, Rhode Island. It's one of those things that there's a chance, but it's 10, 15, probably longer years away from where we're at now, and far more outcry than what's currently going on in the media and elsewhere.
Gotcha.
Well, I think that's a good place to end it. Really appreciate you having taking time out of your day to join us for this podcast.
No problem. It was fun. I enjoy it.
It's very educational for sure.
So this is Brookside Chats. I'm your host, Brooklyn.
Co-host Taco.
And I'm Hal.
And this is Brookside Chats, signing off.